Behind me is Christie Pits Park. Today it's probably best known for the baseball diamonds and as a great tobogganing hill. But this park has a long history, including the worst race riot ever in Toronto. Let's dig in. Garrison Creek runs through this park, as you can see in this 1884 map. Well, it runs under the park because we buried it and turned it into a sewer over a century ago. I talked about Garrison Creek in my video about Toronto's lost rivers. There's a magic link up here, and I'll put a link down in the description so you can find it when you finish watching this video. Garrison Creek's ravine is part of the reason why so much of this park is so far below street level, but also the banks of the ravine were used as a sand and gravel pit called the Christie Sand Pits, named after the street that runs alongside the pits. You can see the pits in this 1890 map. There's a common story that the street, and therefore the park, was named after William Christie, whose company says he makes good cookies, but it's not true. Christie Street actually had its name already by the 1830s, at which point Mr. Christie was still a wee lad growing up in Scotland. The street is actually named after the wife of a local landowner, which was a very common way for streets to get named back in the day. The pits have been in operation since the late 19th century, but by the early 1900s they'd pretty much reached the end of their useful life, and in 1907 the city bought them. It came up with a number of ideas of what to do with this area, including a waste incinerator. But as the locals had already informally been using this area as a park even before the city bought it, they strongly objected to that idea. The people wanted a park, and so the city gave them a park. Garrison Creek had already been buried on the south side of Bloor for quite some time by this point, and it wasn't long after the city bought this area that they buried it here too. But the sewer runs not far below the surface, and sometimes in a couple of the baseball diamonds over there, you can actually trace the course of the sewer because the grass growing directly above the sewer, where the soil is quite shallow, sometimes in certain weather conditions grows differently than the grass elsewhere. The sand and gravel pits are the reason why this park has the distinction of being called pits. The original name for this park officially was Willowvale Park, as you can see on this 1924 map. But even back then, pretty much nobody called it that. People just called it Christie Pits. And eventually the city gave in and officially renamed it, although that didn't happen until 1983. If you've ever wondered why the south side of the park here is pretty much at street level, while the rest of the park is so much lower, have a look at this 1964 aerial photo. That's the Bloor-Danforth subway line under construction. And because it's not very deep here, the section that it runs under has to be pretty much at street level. So that's why everything up to where the subway tunnel runs under here is higher, and then the land suddenly falls off to the lower level for the rest of the park.
On August 16, 1933, a race riot broke out at a baseball game here. It was the Great Depression, and Hitler had risen to power earlier that year. Anti-Semitism was pretty strong, and with all the news reports of the troubles facing Jews in Hitler's Germany, the swastika was a powerful symbol even here. Organizations called swastika clubs sprang up to make Jews feel unwelcome. One of them was in the beaches, where many Jews would go to swim in the lake and cool off in the summer heat. On August 14th, the first game of a baseball playoff series took place between the Harvard Playground team, mostly Jews and Italians, and the team from St. Peter's Catholic Church. Late in the game, a large swastika flag appeared in the crowd. After Harvard won the game, a fight nearly broke out, and overnight a swastika was painted on the clubhouse in the park. The city painted over it, and the police were warned that things could get ugly in the second game, but at the time the police largely turned a blind eye to anti-Semitism. The second game was 2 days later, on the 16th. Both sides had many supporters who came to the park ready for a fight, and fighting broke out even before the game had begun. Fights continued on and off throughout the game, which St. Peter's won. After the game, another large swastika flag was displayed, and the main event was on. And it wasn't just a fist fight. Of course, there were baseball bats, but the spectators had brought things like rocks and metal pipes, and bottles could easily be broken and turned into weapons. Reinforcements for both sides arrived from elsewhere in the city, with one newspaper reporting over 10,000 people were involved, and the fighting spilled out of the park and onto the street. The police were slow to respond, and fighting continued for several hours until late night when they finally got things under control.
Fortunately, nobody was killed, but many people were injured severely enough to require hospitalization. The police came under heavy criticism for their failure to prepare, despite the ongoing harassment of Jews in Toronto, the events at the game 2 days earlier, and warnings about what could happen at this game. Some reports say that they sent only 3 officers to keep the peace, others say 6. But either way, it was wholly inadequate, and it took something like an hour after the end of the game before the police showed up in force. In the aftermath, the mayor banned the display of swastikas in Toronto. Of course, anti-Semitism didn't end. Those who were determined to stir up trouble continued to do so, but not, again, at the same scale as this riot. In late 2025, there was an anti-immigration rally and a corresponding counter-protest here in the park. This time, the police were prepared, and while there were a few arrests for things like assault, it was nothing like the riot of 1933. Well, I hope you enjoyed learning about the history of this park. If you did, you know what to do. Please like and subscribe.